Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. This week we talk to Penny Terry about the topic how to be 10 times more interesting every day. It's a really fun conversation. We have a lot of laughs and we learn some really interesting stories, not only about Penny, but also about Alan. So stay tuned, enjoy, and have a magical week. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. This is a very exciting one because this is the first time I think we've done 2 podcasts in a day. So I'm going to have to mix up my first question. And so usually I ask how everyone's week's been, but and I will save that one for you, Penny. Penny, we will check in on how your week has been. But let's check in with the team. What have you been watching recently? Has there been anything that you've been watching recently that you want to recommend? I'm going to start with you, John. John, anything that you've been watching
Just
recently?
based on our previous early conversation.
That's it. Pre-podcast chat. Anything good?
Yeah, this working from home is wonderful. Fubar, I'd recommend as a leave your brain at the door Arnie Schwarzenegger thing. It's terrible. It's really terrible, but it's very popular. Schitt's Creek would have to be another one. Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So yes, I'm into all the intellectual shows at the moment. They're really empowering me.
Look, I mean, we do hear a lot about interesting and TED Talks and stuff like that. So it is good to break it up with a foo bar every now and then. So great suggestion there, John. Danette, have you been watching anything or reading anything recently?
Oh, geez. I have been watching the last episode of Ted Lasso. Oh, such a good episode. It was over an hour. It was awesome. And I am reading a book, which I will do a book review on shortly, called Imaginable by Jane McGonigal, which is about how future proof your thinking. And it is great. She's got some really good practical tips. So loving that book at the moment. It is awesome. And between the last podcast and this one, I went out the back and the chooks had laid 2 eggs. So winning today.
That's pretty good. Great work, Danette. Al, are you watching anything or consuming any content at the moment?
Yes, one that's, I guess, challenging me is on Disney Plus is Limitless with Chris Hemsworth. And that's where I'm finding out why all these crazy people do things like having ice baths and fasting, which I guess I had no interest in before. But after watching the show, I'm realizing there is method behind the madness.
And Penny, Al has done some ice baths recently and stuff. So I feel like, Al, you could be you're our Chris Hemsworth Limitless correspondent for this podcast.
I'm getting nervous, Jez.
And Grahame, is there anything that you've been consuming recently, content-wise, that's been good?
Not sure where John got his review on Fubar. We watched the first 11 and a half minutes of the first episode and then went outside and watched the grass grow. So no, just watching guinea fowl and chickens amuse themselves and terrify themselves all at the same time. I have left a note with the chickens, despite the fact that they left 2 eggs this morning. We had them for lunch, so they're now back to square one. It's like lift your game. Other than that, not really anything exciting.
Fair enough. I love that we've got some contrasting views there on Fubar.
I did say it was rubbish.
Yeah, you did.
It's absolutely terrible.
But it's got Arnie, so
He doesn't. No.
It's the worst thing that ever happened. Seriously, if we could go back, sorry, Penny, we'll get through this in a minute. But if we could go back to what was it? I don't know, 1763, when the first Terminator movie, like the script was written, and somebody just accidentally spilled like liquid paper all over the "I'll be back" thing, then he wouldn't.
Yes. Yeah, I'll get rid of Conan the Barbarian, his first movie. That was horrible.
But he had a big sword, so it sort of compensates.
It's not the size that matters, I've been told. Hey.
Moving on.
Yeah, well,
Moving on.
Penny, you've actually jumped in on a great episode of Arnie Watch, where this podcast purely about Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you've come on at a great time.
This is obviously where people get cancelled or otherwise. So you're cancelling Arnie. I think people have tried for years, but now it's happening. You know, I did watch the trailer last night. I can't even remember. What's it called? What's the name of the thing? I just went,
Boobar.
Boobar, which is problematic, isn't it? Yeah. But I was like, I watched the trailer. I thought, oh, that seems okay. And then I went, it's not going to be okay, is it? No, he should have stayed in the 90s. It's not going to be okay. He's 90s. He's got 90s energy. I went, no.
Well, there we go. We've got 3 takes on Fubar. I bet none of our listeners were expecting that, so that's beautiful stuff. I also like that this podcast is probably coming out about 4 or 5 weeks after we're recording this, so that it'll be totally irrelevant information, which is great stuff. But anyway, Penny, how has your week been, and have you been watching anything?
I too watched Ted Lasso. And it is that you build these relationships with people, don't you? And then they leave your life. And you're like, what? That's not fair. That's not fair. I feel like I've got this parasocial relationship with you, Ted. I'm still sure that that's why TED Talks are called TED Talks, because they're after you. I know the other one came first, but I'm sure. I have been known to Google the best lines from Ted Lasso to try and use in a keynote. And then you notice it's like one of the top things Googled. And I'm like, I shouldn't do that. That's a bit cliche. Everyone else is using them.
Penny, I wonder whether you'd be better off maybe using some of Roy Kent's lines.
Strangely enough, now I'm not on the radio, I do drop a bit more Roy Kent language these days, but he is a brilliant character, isn't he? Oh my gosh, I love him. And when you see the actor in real life, how different they are, it just blows my brain. But no, I've been watching that. Loved it. There's been a lot of commentary. I can't help watching things and Googling what other people are saying about them at the same time. And there's been a lot of commentary that they've been trying too hard this season. Will it come back? I've been trying to ignore that and just enjoy it. Yes, Danette's got her fingers crossed, correct. But then this week has been pretty good. It's actually been quite laid back, some time to think this week. And this morning I went out and I met someone in the Kmart car park, which I realise sounds really dodgy, someone that I don't know. And we exchanged 2 bat caves and 14 superhero figurines, which makes me sound like one of those people that collects them, which, by the way, I love those people because they are interesting. But I was actually making the first Facebook marketplace sale for my 8-year-old son. We're cleaning out the house. So, yeah, that was pretty good. It's been a good day.
Nice way to bring your 8-year-old son into this, just to make you seem a little bit more normal, Penny. I like it.
Isn't that why we have kids? I don't know. I think so.
Penny, what a great introduction, and that is an interesting thing to say, and we'll get into interesting topics shortly. But I did want to. I love that we've laid all that out, and there may be people that are being introduced to you for the first time. So, outside of selling bat caves and toys on Facebook Marketplace, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and for people that are being introduced to you for the first time?
The judgment, I can feel it. The judgment is heavy. So I live in Tasmania, Jez. I am coming to you today from the country of the Palawa and Pakana people here in Lutruwita, Tasmania, in a place which is called Kullamaluka, which we know as Launceston, just near the Tamar River. And I grew up here, of course, like a lot of Tasmanians. I flew the coop for a little while and then I moved back. And I grew up on a farm. And when you're on the farm, I used to go back to, earn money all the time in the school holidays. The ABC is on all the time. I'm sure it is in lots of parts of Australia, but particularly in rural and regional Australia, because quite often it's the only radio station that you have. And I actually went to university and studied media studies just because I didn't know what I was going to do, and that sounded like it would be fun. And I just was continuing my learning. And I remember being in the car, in the ute, on the farm with Dad. I think we were doing some fencing or something, and the door was open while we were fencing in the freezing cold in the middle of winter in Tasmania, and the radio was on. And I remember thinking, I could probably do that. I think I'm qualified to do that. And then, being so Tasmanian, we went down to the beach over summer, and I was with a really good friend of mine, and he had his new girlfriend with him who worked at the ABC. And I was like, I've been meaning to give them a call to see if I could come and do some work experience. Anyway, she gave me the manager's number, and I remember ringing him for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he didn't get back to me. I'm like, that is so rude. I'm not getting anywhere here. Looks like farming's going to be my career for a little while. And then he finally got back to me and he said, sorry, I've been late getting back to you. We've just had these two guys stuck down a mine for 2 weeks in Beaconsfield here in Tasmania, and how little I knew about the media industry at that stage, about how big a story that was. No wonder he didn't get back to me. Anyway, eventually he did. I started at the ABC. I went to a few different places around Australia and I was there for 10 years. So my background is as an ABC radio presenter. I then left and my sister and I started a business called Healthy Tasmania, and what we do is Lucy, my sister, often describes it as we're a bit like the builder's product, no more gaps. So, you know, there's a lot of people that need support, and there's a lot of people out there who can support them, but they often can't find each other. And so we jump in the middle and we expand out, and we do whatever that might be in the middle. A lot of the stuff that I do is around communication, knowing your value, selling your story. And in fact, while we're on the metaphors, a client said to me a little while ago now, I was working with her one-on-one in a mentoring capacity, and she goes, Penny, you know what? You're a little bit like a TV remote. And I said, what? I'm a radio person. Don't say I'm like a TV remote. And she goes, what you do is you manage to turn people's value up so they can turn their volume down, finally stop yelling. And I think that's kind of what I do, is I help people understand what is interesting about them, what their value is about them, so that other people can make sense of it. And it's easier to understand. So yeah, I'm a trainer, I'm a mentor, I'm a speaker, I'm a podcaster, but it's all around storytelling and helping other people understand what their value is, or what their organization's value is, or what their value is as a leader, and helping them share that with other people.
Wow, what a great, that was an amazing story, Penny. It's so many twists and turns. I love that it started with a freezing cold day with the door open, fencing, and you're like, I've got to be in a studio somewhere.
Totally. And you know what? When you're fencing in Tasmania in the middle of winter, and I grew up in a place called Fingal, which is notoriously on the news every night, the weather, for being the coldest place between it and Liaweenie, for anyone from Tasmania who's listening. If you are trying to, you know, do some hammering when you're fencing and you miss and you get your hand, which I did a lot as a teenager, you can't use that hand again for 15 minutes while it defrosts. So yeah, I had to get good at fencing quickly.
Well, that's amazing stuff, Penny. Amazing to hear that whole story, and we're so happy to have you on today. And I'm sure people have read the title of this episode, but I think you chose such an amazing topic, which is based off what you were saying right at the end there, which was how to be 10 times more interesting every day. What a great topic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you chose this topic?
Yeah, look, I think probably the easiest way to explain it, Jez, is that quite often, in fact, all the time, I would interview people on the ABC, or people that I work with now, or people that I'm interviewing for my podcast. And it's like they are so interesting. Like what they know is so interesting, but they are simultaneously so boring as they're trying to explain what it is that they know and what is interesting about them. And I think that happens for all sorts of reasons. We've sort of been trained to try and be as boring as we can be, particularly in, you know, the corporate world. When we become professionals and we go into our jobs, there are so many people that have got such great stuff to say, but other people can't pick up what they're putting down because of the delivery. And for about 3 years when I was at the ABC, I had like the best job ever. And I don't, not just here at the ABC in Tasmania, I think the ABC in the whole of Australia. I was doing a program, which is the afternoon program, where it's not very news heavy, not hugely into politics. You'd call it a magazine show. And we took it on the road. So we did about 30 or 40 outside broadcasts a year. At that time, most programs did about 3. And so our sort of process was, we wouldn't do much work beforehand, not much planning. We'd work out where we were going to broadcast from. Then we'd arrive in a town at 8:30 in the morning, and we had to have a show to put to air at 2 o'clock. And so my job was to go door knocking, like literally, and find interesting stories to tell. And remember we arrived in this town called Chudley, population of about 150 people, and we were broadcasting just down the road in a place called Mole Creek, which I think, again, population maybe 80 people. So small, we ran out of towns. We had to do speed limits at the end here in Tassie. So anyway, I didn't know much about Chudley, but I think we'd arrived at 8:30 and we'd gone to visit the post office, or it might have been the butcher. They were usually our go-to to tell us who in the town we should go and talk to. And I rocked up to this house and I knocked on the door, and this lady called Enid answered. And there I was with my microphone, and I said my usual spiel. Hi, Enid. My name's Penny from the ABC. We're broadcasting from just down the road today, and I'm wondering if I could interview you quickly about your life here in Chudley. Like, can you imagine someone doing that to you at 8:30 in the morning in your tiny town? How weird that would be. Yeah, anyway, that was kind of my job. But as quick as a flash, she looked at me and she said, why would you want to interview me? I've got nothing interesting to say. Now, I heard that all the time. All the time, people would say that. And so I kind of dismissed it and I said, oh, Enid, why don't we just go and have a cup of tea and we'll work that out. And so I walked down her hallway. My producer was following me, Andrea, and we sat down in the kitchen. She had a couple of friends around, so there was about 5 of us around this table. And if I needed any evidence of how interesting Enid's stories were, when I listened back to the recording, every time she paused, you could hear the fridge buzzing in the background. Like, we were silent. We were hanging off her every word. Anyway, so we did the interview. We walked back down the hallway and I was carrying on saying, oh, make sure you tune in at 2 o'clock. Tell your friends to listen. You won't be on about 20 past. I'll put your interview on a CD and put it in the mail. It was a while ago when we used CDs. And I remember I turned around to thank her and she looked at me and she said, I am pretty interesting, aren't I? And I was like, yes, you are interesting. And so what I realized is that most people, in fact, I've interviewed more than 20,000 people. None of them were boring, but most of them had forgotten why they were interesting. And I guess what I see my job is being that person to remind them why they're interesting. And I think we all need someone like that in our lives. Wouldn't it be good if we just had someone following us around behind us saying, oh, that was interesting. Did you see how, yeah, they were interested in that. Yeah, that was good. So yeah, that's kind of why I like talking about it, because it's really validating and affirming for people to realize that their stuff is interesting to other people, so long as they are brave enough to present it in the right way.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Penny, what a great story. I feel like I could have heard my fridge buzzing as you were describing that one.
That's just the mics, Jez. That's just the microphone.
Awesome. Well, I might start today's questions with Grahame. So, Grahame, what was your question and why'd you pick it?
Thanks, Jess. Looking at the questions in the chat, I'm realising now that I picked it because Danette had already written it. So yeah, that's it's a good start. Excellent. Hi, Penny.
Hi, Grahame.
I
whatever question you want.
Yeah, look. Do you do any coaching with sporting clubs in terms of being able to build improved performance? Doesn't matter. We haven't got time for that. Doesn't matter.
You know what? Actually, while you're on it, Grahame, I'm going to answer that. What I would like you to do is next time you are watching a sports broadcast, listen to the question that the sports reporter asks the player after the game, okay? Because it's never a question. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is about how we can ask better questions.
Yep.
And just because you mentioned it, at the end, they always go, oh, yeah, it was a really tough game, wasn't it? I could see that you were really working really hard in the middle. Not a question, statement. And then the player goes, oh, yeah, like it's really interesting when you watch how we kind of have this etiquette or this way that we work in different industries and what's accepted and what's not accepted. Like that wouldn't work in other places, but it does in sport. Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Sadly, I never get to watch the interviews at the end of the game because I'm normally just curled up in a ball in the corner, crying, sobbing uncontrollably. So I tend to take some of these things like quite literally. And when Jez sent the email around saying that the topic was like how to be 10 times more interesting every day, my literal brain kicked in and said, what the? So I went and I went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror and same question, like how?
Yeah.
You know, so when you get to the peak, like how can you 10 times perfection? So luckily, I wasn't really looking at myself. I am curious to know, but I think you've already sort of answered the question. So the question was sort of like, why is it important
Yeah.
for us to be more interesting right
Yeah.
now on planet Earth?
Well, if we go back to the Arnold Schwarzenegger thing, the robots is why right now. So I think it's important always, but why it's important right now is because of the robots. Up until very recently, it has been valuable for us to be just able to share information. Someone who could share information or curate information was valuable. But if we're moving into a future that's going to be driven by AI services, who've read way more than us and can spit out information way quicker and better than us, then we can't just be doing that. Being information sharers is no longer what people want, and it's not going to be valuable. So I think what the AI bots, whatever we want to call them, can't do as well as we can is be interesting. And I know this because I keep challenging ChatGPT to be better and to be more interesting. And I give it all the prompts and it's hopeless. In fact, the other day I challenged ChatGPT to write me, and I said, an interesting and creative opening for my podcast script. And do you know how it started? Hello and welcome to the podcast. That's how it started. And I was like, wait, why? Because 80% of podcasts start that way, but it's not innovative or creative or interesting. So we've still got that.
Sorry, I was waiting for it. 'Twas a dark and stormy night on my podcast or something, but there you go.
Not even that creative. No, yeah. So robots is the first reason, I think, Grahame. It's more important now than it's ever been. I think the second reason, though, too, is because we are so overwhelmed by information. Information is not the problem. Our attention is. So we're so overwhelmed that we don't know where to put our attention. And if somebody can help us work that out and work out what we should be paying attention to now, that would be great. And then even when we do know where to look, all the research will tell us that our attention spans are broken and we don't know how to keep paying attention to it. So we need to be interesting enough to be able to keep people maintaining their interest in us, because if we are leaders, team members, project managers, people who need to get other people to listen to our stuff and our ideas, if we want to be able to make the change that we want to be able to make the change in, or the way we want to do it, I think we need to work harder to get people to be interested in our ideas and pay attention to us. We need to work harder than we ever have. Again, because of the robots, because of the internet. I'll blame them for everything.
Might as well.
Yeah, may as well. They don't have feelings, do they, as far as I know?
We could ask Arnie.
Okay.
By the way, Mr. Schwarzenegger, I know you are listening because you listen to our podcast a lot. We're just kidding. Please don't get me.
This is actually AI generated. This whole thing isn't a real conversation. But the other thing, I'm just going to finish that up. I think the third reason why it's important now is because I can't think of a better way to say it, but the dodgy people are really good at this. So the people who don't necessarily have good information to share are really good at making what they do have to share interesting, so we pay attention. And so what I want is the smart people to get good at it too, to get better at it, so that we can get good and important information out in the world, because we get, I think we've confused serious with boring in our world. So anything that's kind of serious, we make really boring because we've got to be very serious about it. I actually think the opposite. I think if it's important, let's make it interesting. And we don't. And I think we can do better.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you so
much.
much.
The work is done.
And Arnie, if you do want to do a press tour for Fubar Season 2, please contact us. So I might jump on to Danette's question now. Danette, you did also have a bonus question. You got 2 questions here. So tell us, what was your question? Why'd you pick it?
So I picked what stops people from being interesting, but I'm actually really curious about, when you were talking there, Penny, about serious being confused with boring and how important it is to get that interesting message across. What makes things interesting for people's brains?
That is a great question. I might throw it back to you, Danette. What an annoying tactic of a guest to do. But
I love it.
I mean, I think that if I ask anyone, Are you as interesting as you could be at work every day? The answer is no. And so if I was to ask you, what makes things interesting to you? When do you lean in? Like,
Yep.
when are those moments?
When they're unique, when it's something that I'm learning more about the person and who they really are.
Mm.
I sing when I'm teaching government finance to make it interesting.
I love that.
Sing badly, but it doesn't matter. People remember the message. So I really like that idea, because I totally agree that the dodgy people are good at this already. And we do need the smart people to think about, how do I make this interesting instead of just boring? Because when it is important, we do want the world to hear about it and be able to take that in rather than getting distracted. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that idea of doing something different
Yep.
is really, really important. Like, I often say that there are 3 things that we can do that makes us more interesting, if you like. And the first one is pretty simple. It's to be interested, to learn continuously. And I think I've lost count of how many people have said that before in quotes, and it's because it's true. I think when we learn continuously, then we have this kind of, well, I think we call it growth mindset now, don't we? We're open to new possibilities, and we care about what's going on around us. But I think one of the problems why we don't do that is because we get stuck in routines. We just kind of do the same thing all the time, and that's because the information is overwhelming. So I think one of the things that we can do to help us be interested and curious is to take control of the info that's coming into us. So that is simple things like, who are we following on social media? Who's showing up in our feeds? How long since you did a bit of a curation on that? Do it. Like, why don't you take 5 minutes and ask someone what their favorite podcast is and why you should listen to it, and make sure you're following those particular ones. Have a look at the books that are on your bedside table. Do you want to look at those? So we can curate the information that's coming in. We can also curate our activities as well. What are we doing? Who are we talking to? What are we learning about? So I think it's really simple. It's stuff that we're so busy we don't find time for. But I think if we did, we'd realize that we'd have more time. I think the other thing that we can do is to be interested. The next one is be in tune. So this is learn the commonalities. Often when I'm working with people who, quite often working with leaders who need to talk publicly about things, and they want to, sometimes media training, they want to learn how to be, more interesting, if you like. And the first thing that they're worried about is they want to sound like they know what they're talking about. So that's that be interested bit. The next thing that they want to, that they worry about is not sounding like a dickhead, which I totally understand, right? They don't want to sound stupid. They don't want to sound tone deaf is what they're on about. They don't want to say something that they shouldn't. And so the best thing about being in tune is you can't be tone deaf. Like, it's impossible if you are in tune. So learning the commonalities with the people that we're working with, the people that we're talking with. And I think the best way to do that is to be a better interviewer. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but I sort of have this lens that we're just doing interview after interview every day, every time that we talk with people. And if we're not, then our life isn't as interesting as it should be. Can you imagine if we approached every conversation as an interview, where we were trying to find out things about people and learn those commonalities that we have between them? So be interested, be in tune. And the third one, be innovative. Break the template. We have so many templates in our life, literal ones that we might use on Canva, but then also the metaphorical ones of, the routines that we follow and how things are done around here. We have to do things a certain way. I think the antidote to boring is to break the template and do things differently. Sit somewhere else, talk to someone new, create a new way, and just see what happens. I reckon that will make things more interesting. Yeah.
I often have conversations with taxi and Uber drivers, and they always have the most interesting stories. And it's extraordinary how often they say not many people actually talk to them. I'm like, why wouldn't you? Because you can learn so much. So I love that. Great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, what an opportunity. I wanted to make a whole podcast once of just talking to taxi drivers. This was before Uber came out. I just thought that would be incredible. Just spend a day going from taxi to taxi to taxi to taxi. Just imagine what you come back with. I then wanted to do one with truck drivers. Anyway, you can see what happens with my brain. I want to learn all the things all the time.
I love that. Love it. Love it.
Oh my gosh! And I just thought of a name for that taxi one. It could have been called Fair Enough, but fair spelled
Oh
like
my!
something like that. Anyway,
Hang on, can we copyright patent something right now,
let's
Jez?
do it. All right, I might throw to John now. John, what was your question?
So, Penny, my question comes from one of my favourite movies, which should have got an Academy Award, but Pixar doesn't get those for Best Actor because it was The Incredibles. And there's a line in The Incredibles down the track when the supervillain goes, I want to make everyone a superhero, and when everyone's super, nobody will be. So likewise, when everyone's interesting, will anyone be interesting? And then how do we stand out? I mean, and I get that you've given us three ideas there, but yeah, how do we stand out if everyone's standing out?
Yeah, I think that this is a trap that we fall into, that it's about standing out. And I don't know if it is.
Okay.
I remember one of the most interesting days that I have had at work ever was when I did a live broadcast from the women's prison in Tasmania. I also did one from the men's prison, but I did one from the women's prison. And going in, I really thought about a lot of things. I thought about victim impact, so the people who were listening on the outside, who were the victims of these crimes, how would they be feeling going in and talking to these women? I was thinking about how to keep myself safe, what is okay to ask, what isn't okay to ask, those kind of things. But I was really thinking about what my audience would want to know, and I really thought that they would want to know about how the inmates were feeling about being in there and what they'd done. And that's what I thought. Anyway, we went in. The people who shared their stories were incredible. It was a equally tough and interesting day, and complex and nuanced, and all of the things that you would expect that it would be. But what people said to me afterwards, so the audience, was, "Oh my God, and how about that bit where you asked them about where they got their haircuts? That was amazing. And the stuff that they ate in the kitchen, and how they made their food, and then, what they wear, and how they do washing." Like, it was just this everyday stuff that we were interested in. So I particularly talk about this in storytelling, John, that I think when we ask someone to tell their story, they expect that they've got to have this big, huge story to tell to be able to make people interested, where I think the interesting is in the everyday. So if we can make those everyday things that connect us, that we actually share, interesting, I think that's what makes you interesting. I don't think we're trying to stand out. I think we're trying to create experience in that moment that connects, kind of thing. I don't know if that's feels like a bit of a cop-out answer or not, John, but yeah, I don't think it's and it's kind of scary putting up this topic and then coming on and feeling like I need to be really interesting, because that's what I can't be boring on this one. That's what we think it means. And there is that saying that if you're the most interesting person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And that's because we want to be around interesting people, right? Because interesting people make us feel good. But if you think about the person that you think is really interesting and you like hanging out with, I bet you they're not someone who's done something crazy and outlandish and weird. They're just probably an ordinary person who's interested in you and things around them.
Okay. So there's hope for all of us yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm banking on. That is what I'm banking on.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks for that, John and Penny. I might go to Alan now. Alan, what was your question, and why'd you pick it?
Hi, Penny. My question is coming from one of my father's friends that I used to see once or twice a year at children's birthday parties, and we'd sort of end up sitting there just making small talk, and he wasn't the most interesting guy. And at his funeral, I heard stories about how he stole a train. And I thought, wow, why did I not ask those questions? Which sort of leads me to my question today. How can we discover the interesting stories in other people?
Hang on. A real train? Or a
Um,
toy train?
No, it was back in time a little bit. It was a steam train. He stole it in Junee and drove it to Wagga, unlocked the door to let the engine driver out, and they ran away.
Okay, so we have already come up with a podcast idea. That is a movie script. That is incredible. Can you imagine the stolen train? That is amazing.
I just wanted to ask that guy all about that story, and I thought I had so many opportunities and didn't even know that story existed.
So I've got a couple of stories which are similar, Alan. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but I think everyone's interesting. And I wonder how many times in the last week we've all asked the question, so what's been happening? I think we ask it all the time. And I was really mindful of that question in particular over the last summer holidays, because I asked it thousands of times, but I realised there was only one answer that I remembered. Just after Christmas, I caught up with an old friend who I hadn't seen for ages. And I said to her, so what's been happening? And she looked at me and she said, I hate that question because I always feel like I've got nothing interesting to say. And that kind of hits you in the face, doesn't it? That pressure of having to have enough going on in our lives that we can draw from to answer that question. But we also have to have worked out which bits will be interesting to that other person. And then we need to deliver it in an engaging way. And it's just a really mean question. It's sort of like the impossible ask of everyday etiquette, but we do it all the time. And I mean, if you can quickly have a story or something really great to answer that question, great, do it. And that is often what I teach people how to do. But what I think the real question is whose responsibility is it to make conversations interesting? Is it the question answerer or is it the question asker? And I reckon we put the pressure, the expectation, and then the blame firmly on the answerer. And I wonder if you did this a bit with your dad's friend. Because I mean, if you just picture it, we're at that birthday party, we're asked a question, we're a little bit bored by the answer, so then we decide that the person is boring, not worth our time or worth our business or whatever. And when I say it like that, it's really easy to hear the ego coming through, isn't it?
It is.
Yet if we think about it, that person's probably been taught their whole life not to big note themselves, not to talk about themselves too much, and all of those things that, those social cues that we get implicitly and explicitly. We've been trained not to share anything that is interesting about us. So I like to think, what if it was actually up to the question asker to make conversations interesting? What if it was our job to build the skills to ask better questions? Because I think usually boring answers reflect unremarkable questions. And I mean, one that we get all the time, how much do we hate the question, so what do you do for work? Like, it's a horrendous question. Not that long ago, I was lucky enough to go and be a guest presenter on a retreat for a group of executive women up in Palm Cove. It was a pretty good gig. And the night before, they had a networking night and was where we got to meet people. And I remember going up to this person, and her name was Jane. And I said, oh, hi, Jane. So what do you do? Me being the really boring question asker. And she goes, oh, well, I'm the manager of quality control at some big accounting firm somewhere. And I looked at her and I went, oh, okay. And she goes, no, people always do that when I tell them what they do because they think my job's really boring, but it's not. It's really interesting. And I was like, oh, Jane, it's not that I think your job's boring. It's just I've got no idea what it means. So therefore, I've got no more questions to ask you. And we do that all the time. So, this is the other side of it. As the question answerer, we also need to give people somewhere to go, don't we? So they've got some more questions to ask. So, yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. I think that the responsibility is on both people in the conversation to make things unboring.
I love that idea, Penny. And I can relate to asking those boring questions. Do you have an example of something to start the more interesting questions, like have you ever stolen a train in your life?
No, it wasn't on the list. It now firmly is. Have you ever stolen a train before? Oh, look, I don't know in the everyday. I mean, there's a lot of people that you can go to and they're like, what's the best thing that you did today? And I think some of these questions can feel really awkward if they're not your questions. So I think there's a list. There's a list, isn't there? The 10 best questions that you can ask at any networking function so that you don't do small talk. And I read down that list and I go, oh, gross, none of them sound like me. What's one thing that you would like to say to someone, who's somewhere big at the moment? Or like all of these things. So I think you need to come up with them yourself. So I think the biggest thing is to be mindful and aware of what your conversations are like, and then think about how you could do them differently. And there are questions, like one thing that I maybe would say is there are questions that are big open questions, and they make it really hard for the person to give you an answer, someone that you don't know, because they're big open questions. But if you can kind of make your questions a bit narrower and a bit more specific, then it makes it easier for the person to answer. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Penny. That ties in what Danette was saying about being unique rather than just reciting from a list. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. No worries.
And I think we definitely have to ask more people if they've stolen trains. I think it's just we're missing out on really golden opportunities by not asking that.
Because you're definitely told to not share information like that. Not because you might be big noting yourself, but because you'll get in trouble with the police big time.
What is the statute of limitations on train theft in Australia? Al, you would know that, would you not?
I'm thinking clearly it was once this guy had passed, he was safe.
I'm just thinking more about the people on the podcast today.
I'll look into that.
Trains that thieves do have a look about them, don't they? We just look around this room, the train thief look.
Well, I've thought of the name for that podcast. It's called Full Steam Ahead. Anyway, let's speaking of, we'll grab some final thoughts, because we've what a great conversation. We're gonna have you back on, Penny, because we've got so much more to ask you, and I feel like we probably could do a whole nother podcast on this exact topic. But let's jump around the room and grab some final thoughts from people. So I might start with you, Grahame. Any final thoughts on today's conversation and how to be 10 times more interesting every day?
Absolutely amazing, Penny. Thank you so much. Being so Tasmanian, I mean, what a gorgeous way to start any sentence. What a wonderful way to start any sentence. I love the insight of the person who paid enough attention to share the TV remote sort of metaphor with you. And what an amazing opportunity for us to help turn up the value for others so that they can turn the volume down. I think it's spectacular. So thank you. It's been an absolute blessing to be part of this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Grahame. And I'm sure that there's people listening who feel like they're saying the same things over and over again, banging their head up against a brick wall. And I'm sure you all work with people like that. So, helping people know that they don't have to yell, because yelling only makes you louder, not easier to hear. Helping them know that they can turn their volume down is just so validating and comforting. Yeah,
it is. Thank you. Can you, when you're talking about you don't have to yell, can you just look directly to Danette when you say that, please?
that's I'm on your side, Danette. Don't worry. If we have to pick sides, I don't know. That's a mean thing to say. I've only just met you, Grahame.
Amazing. Danette, I'm actually just throw to you. Any final thoughts on today's conversation and how to be 10 times more interesting every day?
What a great podcast. Penny, I just have to say, Grahame, can you just duck for a second? Remember I was telling you about that Tasmanian artist?
Yes.
Picture behind Grahame.
As in quack quack, or
No.
Oh, okay. Remove my head from the video space.
But this is Scollen Sadie Cook in Tassie, and she just creates amazing stuff. So that just reminded me, I hadn't shown you what her stuff looked like. So everything in today's session was fabulous. Thank you, Grahame, John, very much for ducking. You can unduck now. I loved your 3 points, and just how, as the questioner or the answerer, how we can contribute better to those conversations to make them more interesting and just create that connection. So thank you so much. Awesome. We will definitely have you back if you'll come back and join us. Thank you.
Well, and just on that, I want to just, for people listening, it can feel really hard to be interesting, like another job we have to do. I've got no time, all of this stuff on and on and on and on. And I get that. So I don't want to give people another job. I just want them to think about what they're doing at the moment. And I think it's just good hygiene, good communication hygiene. Like brushing your teeth is good hygiene. And if you don't brush your teeth, then, your breath becomes stale and people give you a bit of a wide berth. And I think it's the same with being interesting. If you don't brush your teeth and have good communication hygiene, then people start giving you a wide berth because your ideas have got stale.
Amazing. Also, I'm going to recommend to people that wanted to see the image, you can go to our Spotify and watch this podcast. So I would recommend that if you want to see the art that we're talking about. And we also do have a podcast with Scollen that you can check out to hear about sort of her background. And we chatted to her about some artwork as well. John, I'm going to go to you now. Any final thoughts on today's conversation and how to be 10 times more interesting every day?
Yeah, for me, there are a couple of takeaways, but that boring answers reflect, the unremarkable questions. And I hate small talk, but I think more because I go to the boring questions. I go to the very simple and, I'm not really that engaged. So therefore, ask a simple question and get a simple answer, I guess. And that we're trained to be boring. So, yeah, very much from a young age where kids would be outside playing, mum and dad would be inside, and you get the very simple questions from the adults coming through that were repetitious, and you go, okay, well, that's what I've got to be, and maybe I don't got to be that no more. So, yeah, the other takeaway is things may be grave, but they don't need to be serious or boring.
Yeah, there's an awesome, she's a Harvard-trained neuroscientist called Lisa Genova, and she's got a book called Memory, which is really cool. Oh, called Remember. Sorry, it's called Remember. And she says in that our brains don't remember things that are boring and familiar, which is most of our lives, right?
Yeah.
But they do remember things that surprise us, are emotional or meaningful. So if we want people to remember what we say, we need to surprise them. So do something different, connect it with an emotion or make sure that it's meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That opens up a whole different conversation.
Yeah. Yes, the surprise bit, it does. But there are good ways and useful, appropriate ways to do that.
I was thinking of exactly the same thing. I don't know.
Of course. Of course.
Amazing. And thanks, John, and thanks, Penny. I'll go to Al now. Al, any final thoughts on today's conversation and how to be 10 times more interesting every day?
Yeah, I really relate to what John was saying about, we're doing what we were taught. Asking those boring questions is, helping me find out the boring things. And the big thing changing in my mind is I would say I do a lot of weird things. I'm reframing that to I do a lot of interesting things now, which that's very different from the message my tribe was giving me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's why they're paying attention to you, Alan.
Sack the tribe, Al.
It
Sack the tribe. Get rid of the tribe. Put them on a train.
And I'll drive.
And Al, you're prepping yourself for Limitless season 2, mate. We know you're going to be the next Chris Hemsworth there.
Well, the thing I noticed in that, Jez, was his mates came along and did the exercise with him. I reckon you and I would make a fantastic team.
That's it. I love it. We'll reach out to Netflix shortly. I think that's a great idea. Penny, any final thoughts on today's conversation and how to be 10 times more interesting every day?
Just remember that you already are. So it's already there. You just need to work out a way to get it out and to bring it out in others. I want to kill boring. I don't think boring is a thing. We've reflected on, we've been trained to be boring, particularly in the corporate world, for all really good reasons. Most of them about risk and avoiding risk. But just stop editing out your interesting bits. I think that's it. People don't want to know what you've read. They want to know what you've experienced. Know what you know and be proud of it, really.
Amazing. Well, what a great conversation, Penny. We've really, really enjoyed having you on. It's been so good. I've learned so much. I feel like we've got great stories. Even I feel like sort of even utilizing what you've been talking about. We got a great story out of Alan about a train driver, or train robbery that we haven't got out. So it shows the sort of power of all these different questions and stuff. So that's amazing. Now, Penny, if someone's listening to this and they've gone, I want to get in contact with Penny, I've loved everything that I've heard. Where are the best places for them to reach out to you?
Sure. So pennyterry.com, you'll find me there. I've also got a podcast that I put out fortnightly, which is one story told in 5 minutes with a penny dropping moment every time and plenty of puns, obviously. It's so cliched. But it's called The Penny Drop, and you'll find that wherever you get your podcasts. It's just 5 minutes. I've also got a newsletter, and you'll find that if you go onto my website, or just find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. Penny Terry. It sounds like a name out of a kid's cartoon. Penny Terry, it rhymes. Anyways, so I'd love to hear from people. Subscribe to the podcast, sign up to the newsletter. Thank you so much for having me on, everyone. It's been a really fun conversation with a bunch of interesting people. My goodness. And a train theft.
That's it. Well, Penny, we all those links will be in the description of this podcast, so you can definitely go check them out. I'd recommend go checking out that podcast as well. I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. Penny, thank you so much for being on the podcast. All our regulars, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Great episode, and to everybody listening at home, have a magical week.